Birds commonly seen at the headlands of Dana Point, California, a virtual field trip. This is another JDW Talks. My targeted audience are the Friends of the Headlands, that is a support group, the docents that man the Nature Center, beginning birders, and Headlands visitors, and anyone who wants to know about the natural history of that area, especially birds. If you want to know more about me, I have a small pocket website that I'm showing you a link. So today's May 24th. I think it's time to get out of my quarantine and check on the Headlands Parks and Preserves in Dana Point. I haven't been there in months. I go there quite often usually. And I'm driving up to the Nature Center. Flag is half-mast. It's Memorial Weekend, and we're also contemplating all the deaths we're having. And I see a sign, and it says that the Nature Center is not open, and neither is the preserve. And it's closed until further notice. Dawn. But I did see some of the other access points to the trails of the city, and those are open. Thinking about this, I think it might be a good idea to try and educate people about the Headlands, to bring it to people who can't come here and are still worried about getting the pandemic disease, and contributing some information toward the natural history of the Headlands. And so I decided to run a virtual field trip. Who wants to go on a field trip with me? Show of hands. Oh, everybody here. That's a surprise. Now, I know that some of you may not have ever gone into the field to try and identify birds. However, I want to tell you that we were all once beginners at birding, and we make mistakes. That happens. Pete Dunn says the following: birding should be above all else fun. It should be fun. No one should ever go into the field worried about making a mistake or misidentifying a bird. There isn't a birder on the planet who hasn't misidentified a bird. The difference between a beginning birder and an experienced one is that beginning birders have misidentified very few birds. Experienced birders have misidentified thousands. Now, I admit that there are some people that have difficulty in identifying birds. I'm not sure why that happens, but Ogden Nash is one of them. He wrote a whole poem about it. Bird watchers top my honors list. I aimed to be one, but I missed. Since I'm both myopic and astigmatic, my aim turned out to be erratic. And I, bespectacled and binocular, exposed myself to comment jocular. We don't need too much bird lore, do we, to tell a flamingo from a towhee? I don't think we've ever had a flamingo fly over the headlands. We have two species of towhee. Yet I cannot and never will unless the silly birds stand still. And there's no enlightenment in a tour of ornithological literature. Is yon strange creature a common chickadee or a migrant alouette from Picardy? I don't think we've ever had those there. You can rush to consult your nature guide and inspect the gallery inside. But a bird in the open never looks like its picture in the birdie books. Or if it once did, it has changed its plumage and plunges you back into ignorant gloomage. That is why I sit here growing old by inches, watching a clock instead of finches. We have finches at the headland. But I sometimes visualize in my gin the Audubon that I ought to been. See, the mistake is watching a clock. You have to go out into the field to learn about nature, and it's to your advantage if you go on a field trip with someone who knows quite a bit about it. Another suggestion from one of my favorite biologists, John Burroughs, who was actually more famous than Muir at the time. He says, if we think birds, we shall see birds wherever we go. You must have the bird in your heart before you can find it in the bush. Lots of bushes on the headlands. Now, I've done most of the heavy lifting for you. I've done the field work. I know basically what's there. I made a checklist of the birds we may see. Now, I know you have doubts here. Some of these birds are found only during the wintertime. Some are only found during the summertime. Some are only found during migration. But this is a lucky field trip, this virtual field trip. And I have a feeling that we're going to see most, if not all of these. So you can refer back to this. In fact, you can freeze the video to see exactly what birds we're going to potentially see. Of these 30 species, 4 of them are probably coastal birds, 11 are urban. The headlands are not that big, it's only 60 acres, so there's a big urban influence of species. 7 of the bird species need coastal sage, which is the main habitat of the headlands, and I have 8 other species. I guess we need a field guide. A real field guide could be Merlin. It's a bird app, it's free, and I will talk about that in a second. Another place you might want to go to is something called ebird.org. It generates checklists for the headlands, and it generates bar charts. And we'll talk about those and show you bar charts for those species. Merlin is an app for both an iPhone and an Android smartphone. It's free. When you load in Merlin, you need to load in what's called a bird pack, and the US West Coast is a hefty 555 megabytes. So make sure you have space for it. This is one of the things Merlin does. Merlin is a field guide. So it tells you information about each of the species, gives the sound. We're not going to include sound on our virtual field trip, but it will give sound, and it will give identification hints. So here I am on Harbor Point on January 23rd, and everyone's telling me, look at that bird, go over there and take a picture of that bird, which isn't moving, very tame. Well, the reason it's not moving is it's sitting on a rabbit that it just killed. So Merlin says, where did you see the bird? Well, Merlin knows where the bird is because it has a GPS and a smartphone, and it can tap into that, or you can put down the location. Merlin says, when did you see the bird? Well, Merlin knows that because it taps into your phone's date utility. Merlin says, what size was the bird? Hoping that you know what a sparrow looks like, or maybe a robin, or a crow, or a goose. This is a pretty hefty bird. So I'm going to put down it's between a crow and a goose. The next question, Merlin asks lots of questions, is what were the main colors? And I can choose up to 3. And I decide, well, I'll do 1. It looks mostly brownish. Now, this is getting harder because this is not only actions but habitat. And I look at the choices, and there's no choices of sitting on a rabbit. It's not really in trees or bushes, it's on a bush. So I cheat, and because I know this bird soars in the air, circles, and I choose that, I'll show you what happens if I chose in trees or bushes. And then Merlin, knowing all of these information about birds in your area, and it gets it from eBird, which we'll talk about next, orders the choices and says the most probable bird is a red-tailed hawk, which it indeed is. The next one is a red-shouldered hawk. If I had chosen in trees or bushes, the red-shouldered hawk would be first. And as I say, it will say details about the bird, the sound of the bird. Now, the sound of this red-tailed hawk might be familiar to you. You've heard it enough on television, but every time you see a bald eagle, because a bald eagle song is kiki, which is pretty pathetic, they pipe in a red-tailed hawk sound. So be aware. eBird, we'll go through eBird. This is the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It's going to help us on our virtual field trip. I go to the Explorer. I go to Hotspots. And hotspots are locations created by eBird users. Multiple birders can enter their checklist, the information they see every day, their checklist of birds, in the same shared location, creating composite results. So here we have the Dana Point area. Each of those teardrops is a hotspot. Here are some of the Dana Point parks. There's not that much checklist here. And here is the preserve. And the preserve has 314 checklists. And I've seen collectively over, well, it was in May 2019, was 146 bird species. Now, David Sibley says that the first 50 species that beginners learn are very difficult. And then after that, it gets easier. And you have to learn the common birds first before you can figure out, hey, that's an uncommon bird. That's unusual. eBird will also generate a checklist of an area, including the parameters that you pick. So here I picked May, the past 10 years, and it generates a list of 58 species. So you're not going to see all 146 in a single month. So you can see there, May, past 10 years, 58 species. And you can do that for any of the checklists. It's really kind of a neat little tool. Okay, we're going to start a virtual field trip here. This is a map of the Headlands city map. I think we need to figure out what sort of equipment, since we're going on this virtual field trip. You have a good pair of walking shoes, I hope. Maybe a hat. I don't think you'll need water. The Nature Center has water. Once it opens, there's a water fountain there. Also bathrooms. Binoculars. You have a pair of binoculars. The Nature Center will loan out binoculars. You give them an ID to hold them. Hey, this is a virtual field trip. Why don't you splurge? A good pair of binoculars runs a couple of $1,000s. Get that. And I definitely think you need a virtual camera and you better know how to use it, because bird photography is a bam bam situation. We may have opportunities to take pictures during our virtual walk. I'm going to start on PCH, going into the Headlands. This is the Hilltop Park. We'll walk that. Then we'll walk along the trail and go down to Harbor Point Conservation Park, where the trails look very different today. They have made a loop and did an observational area. Very nice. And then finally, we'll walk around the Dana Point Preserve itself, looking at birds, and then end up basically at the bottom of Selva. So here we are at the front staircase off of PCH. There's parking around the corner. And let me answer a couple questions. Who took the photos? When were they taken? Well, you can see here that I took the photos, and a lot of them were taken in 2010. 2010 was when the center opened, and I gave a talk to the docents there on how to identify birds, and went through and took a lot of photos to do a virtual tour. I did another talk in 2019, added some photos, and obviously today I added some photos too. And as far as I know, every photo that you will see is either on the Headlands or just adjacent to it. So look at that. Do you see that bird up there? Now, birders have been accused of having great vision. All we do is we look for something that doesn't belong. There shouldn't be an object on that fence. There shouldn't be a massive something on the top of a tree. Now, I'm not going to blurt out what that bird is initially. That's not going to help you learn. So what I'm going to do is, when I look at a new bird, I'm going to tell you a lot about it, maybe a little thing for you to remember. And then I'm going to wait 5 seconds before giving you the answer. Because if I gave you the answer immediately, you would say, oh, Joel, I don't have to think. Joel will give me the answer. So I'll embarrass you with 5 seconds and see how many of the 26 birds are tagged after the 4 question marks. So let's go up this brand new preserve, and there's the bird that's sitting on the wire. Birders generally go from bill to tail, trying to figure out what's going on. It's a pretty brownish looking bird, has a funny bill. Probably eats seeds. Mostly brown. There's some speckling on the bird. Look, there's a dark spot right around its ear. Variable black markings on the wing, pointed tail. The bar chart of the checklist show that pretty much every checklist had this bird, this species, throughout the year. It's a resident. And you should be familiar with this. But I'm going to ask you another question, and it's actually a hint. Is this bird an early riser? Or is it continually grieving? You got 5 seconds. And the answer is it's sad. It's a mourning dove. Now, I can suggest why it's sad, actually. One of my interests is names of birds, scientific names, common names, people whose name adorns species. In fact, I have a species named after me. It's a small mite, but you know, species is a species. If you look in the upper left, there's a whole book about people whose name adorns various birds. That happens to be Heermann's gull, and that happens to be Adolphus Heermann, who I know quite a bit about because I revised his biography. He looks like a wild person there. He's in costume. He's actually probably a millionaire, and this is about 1850. He collected extensively in California. And so I find from my books that mourning doves were first named by Linnaeus. He thought they were a pigeon. They're not. Columbus is a pigeon. And Charles Bonaparte was a person who named birds, and he changed the genus to his wife, Zenida. Both Zenida and Charles were first cousins, and they were also niece and nephew to Napoleon Bonaparte. Well, the marriage was an arranged marriage and did not last, and it was eventually annulled. And I think all these mourning doves are really, really sad about having the name of Charles Bonaparte's ex-wife. Really, really a sad story. So let's continue along on the trail. You notice that it's restricting the public from going out into the habitat. Habitat sensitive enough, we don't want people wandering around. And let's see what's the next animal that we can find. Aha! Now, this is December, wintertime, and there's a whole flock of little birds that came in. They do everything together. In my yard, they take baths together in the bird bath. They feed together. That's one of the field marks of these birds. They have a high-pitched twitter, and some people might confuse these with gnatcatchers. They're not a gnatcatcher. Their nest is a crazy-looking nest. You know, if you've ever cleaned out a clothes dryer, the vents in the back, and you get all this junk out of it, that's what a bush-tit nest look. Whoops, I said. Oh, forget what I said. That's what a nest looks like of this species. 5 seconds. And it's a bush tit. I shouldn't have blurted it out. You can see that it's pretty much a resident, but it's a little splotchy in its distribution on the headlands. We know they do breed on the headlands. Let's continue a little bit farther and see. Oh, look at that bird. What type of bird is that? Let's look at another picture I took in 2019. So you should get a general feeling of what that bird is. Is it a hawk? Is it a duck? Is it a heron? In addition to that, we're looking at bill to tail. Yellow bill, striped head, white and black, etc., etc. And it's named for its head and the type of bird it is. It is it's a white-crowned sparrow. Now look at its distribution. It's not found here during the summer months. It is a winter visitor. In fact, when they show up starting September, October, that's to many birds a sign that we're starting fall. Where does this bird go? Well, there are 5 subspecies, and the ones in Morro Bay don't migrate. The ones north of Morro Bay migrate south, just south of Morro Bay. And the farther north the white-crowned sparrow populations are, the farther south they migrate. It's called a leapfrog migration. So the distance between us and Morro Bay, you figure that distance above Morro Bay, and it's probably north of San Francisco is where these guys are. They have a distinctive song, and their song has dialects. So someone who works with these populations might tell you, oh, well, that bird has a San Francisco dialect. People say I have a New York dialect. I don't understand why. Just because I lived and was raised in New York, I don't hear that. Let's go to the top of Hilltop. Remember, this is when it first opened. They decided for the first couple of years to irrigate the area to give it a shot because it was open to the public, the parks before. There was a lot of damage, of degraded habitat, and so you'll see these watering devices. I want to make a point about this. I'm going to show you the same little staircase in, I think, 2018, 2019. It takes a lot of effort to maintain a wildlife preserve. And you can see that in 8 years that there's been a lot of erosional damage, etc. And so we commend the city of Dana Point to maintain this. It is one of the gems and one of the attractions of this area. Here we are looking at the very end of this, looking down, and you can see that coastal sage is under pressure for development. People would love to have their houses there. It's a flat area, so it doesn't take much to put houses there. And in this particular case, they have ocean views. So who wouldn't want to put houses there? And it's very lucky that we have even what we have today, the headlands, which was mainly protected by a sensitive bird species and a sensitive mammal species. So let's go down again. You can see the irrigation, and you can see parts of it that still are around. Anywhere on coastal sage, which is pretty two-dimensional, you get a larger structure. Take a look at the top and see if there's something there. And yes, there, right there. There must be something there. That looks out of place. Aha! You should know at least what the type of bird is. Doesn't look like a hawk. Doesn't look like a sparrow. Has the wrong bill for a bird of prey. What is it? Well, this is a hummingbird. This is Anna's hummingbird. I'll tell you a little bit about this. First of all, those specialized feathers on its, and this is a male, on his forehead and throat is called a gorget. and they're special feathers. They're specially modified so that when light strikes them, color comes off of them. The color is not in the feather. It's a structural feather. So here, I gave up trying to take a picture of this bird. Instead, I just took a movie and then spliced out what I wanted to show you. This is at 1/8 speed. So watch how it turns its head. These guys live about 10 years, which is a surprise. And this doesn't do justice to that flash. And you can see how quickly the angle changes. Who was Anna? Well, it turned out this Italian was a surgeon on a ship, sailing ship. He went around the world in 1827 and 28, and they spent a couple of months off the coast of California. He collected the first specimen of this hummingbird around probably San Francisco, along with a greater roadrunner. And when he was back in Europe, he was in France, and he gave some of his specimens to Duke of Rivoli, Victor Messina, whose friend happened to be Rene Lesson, who was a very well-known ornithologist, person who named species. And he looked at the Duke's collection and recognized immediately that some of his specimens were new to science. So Lesson named the bird in France, not in the United States, after the Duke's wife, Princess Anna, who never saw the bird alive nor ever visited America. Anna's hummingbird. This is the for Vancouver, British Columbia. It's their city bird. Kind of interesting. Okay. Oh, look there, movement. Did you see the movement of that bird? Did you really? This is a slide. How could you have done that? All right. Anyway, the movement. It flirts around a lot. What is that thing? Aha. Here's a better view. This is April. The male acquires that black cap. During the winter, it does not have that. What is this bird? If you guessed that it was, you shouldn't guess. If you knew that it was a California gnatcatcher, you were right. It's a resident bird. It's an indicator species, which means there's good sage here if you see a California gnatcatcher. It's a threatened species. It's legally protected. And it's one of the few sites in Orange County that you have a very, very good chance of seeing one of these, even though our populations are not that large, but I think they're stable. It's also what's called a flagship species. It acts as the symbol for the campaign to protect coastal sage scrub habitat. And by achieving protection for the gnatcatcher, the situations of many other species which need coastal sage scrub, they're obligate, was also improved. So it's an important species. Okay, let's continue. In 2010, there was a fire break along this trail, and they since have allowed the native vegetation to come back. And you can see in 9 years how much succession there has been. Some of the large vegetation there is no longer there. That has been removed. So let's go down the stairs, and we're going toward Harbor Point. We look around. Aha! Look at that on the sign. Well, it obviously doesn't have much respect for bicycle riders and pedestrians. Has a wonderful name. Mimulus is a mimic. So this is a bird that sings other birds' songs. Poly means many, and glottis means tongue. It's a multiple-tongued mimic. Flash is white. Urban bird. What is it? It's our northern mockingbird, a resident of the Headlands, an urban bird. So here it is in 2010. Oh, look at that bush over there. Let's look at that first, and then we'll go into um, Harbor Point. It's always filled with birds. In 2019, I just sat there with a camera, took a whole bunch of different pictures. The males are very reddish. Look at that bill. That bill must be a seed-eating bill. So if you looked at it, you'd say seed-eating bill, rufous on the head, part of the chest, streaks on the flanks, maybe a little bit of wing bars, etc., etc., etc. What's the bird? It is a house finch. So here's another bird on this same bush. And here's a male and a female. Also a seed eater. Look at that heavy bill. What is it? It's a lesser goldfinch. And here is the bar charts for both of those. The house finch, urban bird, resident of the headlands. The lesser goldfinch is a little bit more sporadic. There are two species of goldfinch. This is the more common one. Okay. Oh, look, another bird just came in. This is much larger. Doesn't look like it has a seed-eating bill. In fact, it's a flycatcher. Shows that white prominent in its throat. It has kind of that yellowish wash. What is it? It is a Cassin's kingbird. It's a kingbird. So let's figure out who Cassin's was. John Cassin was a curator at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. In the 19th century, 1850, 1860, that was the center of science in the United States. And he classified birds from all over the world because his collections came from all over the world. For instance, Human, who I investigated, collected in California around the gold rush days, loaded his specimens on sailing ship down to the Isthmus of Panama, across the isthmus by land, onto another sailing ship, and then to Philadelphia. That's where our California specimens are that he collected during that period of time. And so Cassin is honored with a number of common names and even scientific names. Now, it turns out there are actually two kingbird species on the headlands, as you can see here. But you can see for the western kingbird that they're mainly here in migration as they come through. Now, Cassins may also show migration as well. There are some bird populations that have resident birds and migratory populations come through as well. But you can see that the western kingbird doesn't have that white in the throat, actually has clear white outer tail feathers, while the Cassins, even though that end of the tail is eroded a little bit, has white at the tip of the tail. There are a number of other field marks as well. Okay, let's go back to Harbor Point. I was there today. They have this very nice sign now about what the rules are. And of course, because we are in this pandemic, there are warning signs here from the city all over the place about stay 6 feet away. That's going to be difficult on these trails, so you better wear a mask if you to avoid these sorts of problems. Got views of the harbor. Views. Oh, look at that! There's a bird there. It's on the mast of probably that's the Pilgrim. Now, for those of you who haven't heard, the Pilgrim sunk in its berth, and they're now trying to salvage parts of it. And that happened, I don't know, within the year. So that was a real problem. But this bird, Look at that bill. Wow. People, look at that. They think, wow, gee, maybe that's an eagle, but it's not an eagle. It's a specialty bird that feeds on fish. That's a fish bill. If you ever see one of these grab a fish, it rotates the fish in the air, so the fish's head is facing forward. So it's much more aerodynamic um, in order for the bird to fly with it. So what is this bird? It is an osprey, a fish-eating bird. And they tend to be around the harbor. I don't have a bar chart for this because it tends to be irregular. Neat bird. Now, since we are in Harbor Point, we should know something about ridge lift. And the definition is it's created when a wind strikes an obstacle, usually a mountain ridge or cliff, that is large and steep enough to deflect the wind upward. And that certainly is true of Harbor Point. And so when you're there, you might see a stream of these large birds coming through. What are they? These are brown pelicans that were almost wiped out because of pesticides thinning their eggshells. Classic situation of a food chain problem. And there's still some concern about the populations of this species. Okay. Oh, hey, look. Get your virtual camera ready. There's something here. I mean, if you keep fumbling with it, you'll never get this picture. Let's see. Look up. Look up. Wow. Look at that. Right above our heads. Enjoying the lift. A red-tailed hawk and a Cooper's hawk. Red-tailed hawks are a type of hawk that are called bootios. They are heavy. They soar around. They have good eyesight. They dive on their prey. Cooper's hawks are called accipiters. They chase after their prey. They can go through a tree's branches. They can run through the coastal sage after a California quail. Look, they're still up there. Take another picture. Another one. Take another one. Boy, they sure are having a lot of fun. You never know what you're going to see at the Headlands. I mean, if you went to the Headlands thinking you're not going to see anything new, then why go? Aha! Here's a bird that's right on the edge. Let's look at that. Its bill, I don't know. It's a seed, must be a seed eater. It's pretty uniform color except for the red underneath its tail. A little bit red on its throat as well. Tends to be in sage. It's a California towhee. This is one that gave Ogden Nash problems, a towhee. Has a staccato sort of song. And then we have this bird, which keeps flying back to the same area. That's characteristic of a flycatcher. It may be on a post and it flies back. It's always out in the open. It's looking for insects. Has a sharp bill. In fact, sometimes they'll even eat a lizard or something. White belly. Has a mud nest. Very unusual. You might think it's a swallow. It's a black phoebe. Now we do have this thing here that's not as common on the Headlands. You can see the bill looks a bit like the black phoebe. It has this kind of salmon ventral area. And this is a related species. It is a Say's Phoebe. Say Phoebe? No, that's a person's name. It's a person's name. You can see the black phoebe is a resident bird. It is found in urban areas. Say's phoebe is a lot more sporadic on these checklists. And Say was a very famous individual. Thomas Say is considered the father of American entomology. He's an insect specialist, and his name adorns both the black and Say's phoebe. Both of them have the genus named after Say, and Say's phoebe also has the species name. And Say has bird experience. He wrote up a report on an expedition to the Rocky Mountains in 1819 and 1820 that found the species. Lots of history behind bird names. Okay, it's June 2010. We're going up the hill towards the Nature Interpretive Center. Gee, there are a lot of people here. They must be all for my virtual field trip, right? Well, I don't know why their backs are facing me. I guess I'm the one that's taking the picture. Let's see what's going on. Ah, it's Earth Day, April 22nd, 2010, and it's the dedication of the Nature Center, one of the gems of Dana Point, California. The Dana Point Nature Interpretive Center, when it's open, is manned by staff and docents. You can be a docent if you want to go through a training program. I think some of them have backgrounds in history and archaeology and Native American history, botany, zoology, lots of different things. It's a small area, but there are activities for children there. There are exhibits. It's a neat place. Of course, there are bathrooms there, and there are water fountains. But also, you could pick up some brochures, and there's some really nice brochures there at the Nature Center. However, you can do that in your own house. This website is the Dana Point City website for the Interpretive Center. There is a link there to the brochure they have. The brochure is really nice. It has an aerial photograph of the area with all the landmarks shown, and there are lots and lots of photos there of the plants and animals that you might expect to see. In fact, I have I think at least one photo on this brochure. Whoops, I shouldn't have said that. You may be able with your virtual camera to get a photo on the next part of the field trip that's going to be in this brochure. It's going to be really neat. So take advantage of that, and let's move on. That tree in the back's no longer there. It's filled with birds. Those are American crows. Those are American crows. You know what a group of crows is called? These are pretty aggressive birds on occasion. Called a murder of crows. Now people keep saying, do we have ravens here? And the answer is absolutely. Common raven. Look at the large size bill. Look at the edges of the wing. It's almost like a bird of prey. How do you tell the difference between them? Well, the raven says nevermore, nevermore. That's a joke, a little joke there. The raven has a hoarse call. Crow is very, very clean. In addition to that, the raven's tail, I say, looks like an upside down ice cream cone, while the crow's tail tends to be more right across and rounded. The crows are resident in the area. They actually breed here. And the ravens are sporadic. That urban strip has all sorts of interesting things next to the interpretive center. Here we have two birds. The one on the left is a mourning dove. Didn't think I would ask you again for the same bird, did I? Did you? However, the one on the right is different. It's an exotic. Means it didn't originate here, but it's established itself. What is it? It's a Eurasian collar dove. A Eurasian collar dove. It has an interesting scientific name. The first part of the name is not interesting. It's just Greek for collar dove. Duh. Second part of the name is interesting. Deca means 10, octo means 8, 18. And presumably it was named 18 because when it starts calling, it repeats the call 18 times. I have always stopped to count. I've never reached 18. Octo, deco, octo is also a Greek myth. A hard-worked maidservant bemoaning her pay of a miserly 18 pieces a year prayed for release and was changed by the gods into a dove that echoed her mournful cries. Seems doves are always grieving. Not clear to me whether the gods did her a favor or not, and or showed any empathy for her situation. Here's another bird in that urban area, that urban fringe by the nature center. It has a hanging nest in palm trees. It's also a nectar feeder. It's something called a hooded oriole. Very pretty bird. And look at its distribution. It's only here during the spring and early summer. Where is it the rest of the year? It's down in Mexico and Central America. This is a bird that comes up here to breed, and a lot of your neighbors have it. I recognize when spring comes, it has a sharp upward call note. Very distinctive. Oh, look across the street. There are a couple of birds. Wow, look at that. That was unusual at that time. I'll show you the bar charts for that. Different area of the air of the preserve. So what is this? This is our state bird. What is this bird? It is a California quail. And you see up until last year, 2019, there are only 3 months in which they had checklists at all for this bird. The headlands was just not large enough. It did not have a permanent source of water. But last year, there was a number of them here, and they actually raised young. They have a distinctive call. When you teach birding, you try and translate a bird's call into some sort of language. And the traditional way of teaching California quail is to say the call sounds like Chicago, Chicago. Well, that doesn't make any sense. This is a bird, this isn't a bird from Chicago. This is our state bird. Can't be right. So one of my students came up to me and said, that's true. What the bird is actually saying is Modesto, Modesto. That makes a lot more sense. All right, let's start going toward the preserve. There are houses along here. Gee, that house has a keep out sign. Well, I can appreciate that. I've seen a stranger looking in their window. Can you believe that? With a lizard in its bill. I mean, how would you like to have that happen to you? Wake up in the morning and open up the window? So here we have a bird, an unmated male, that is displaying to himself. Can't find a female. He is, and he doesn't go beep beep, by the way. He's a greater roadrunner. Now this is a favorite of the public, and I can see why. I have management concerns. This greater roadrunner was a specialist on lizards. The Headlands is not that big. How much land do you need to have stable populations of species? These lizards are orange-throated whiptails. And if you go into the literature, you'll find this quote that this whiptail is listed as a California species of special concern because much of its habitat has been destroyed for development and what's left is highly fragmented. It inhabits only 25% of its former range. So this lizard, and I firmly believe that, this lizard's population was lowered dramatically by this single roadrunner, which will feed on anything. It'll feed on gnatcatchers. The Headlands preserves are about 60 acres. A roadrunner breeding territory, that is, 2 birds and young, is said to be from 69 acres to 122. So the Headlands is too small, according to the literature, to actually have nesting roadrunners. And you can see the quote that roadrunners are absent from many fragmented habitat patches. So the managers of wildlife refuges have a lot of balancing acts to do. Okay, let's go through our 2010 fence. So let's take a second and talk about this preserve we're in. It's really pretty preserve. It's about 30 acres. It has an interesting history of people trying to develop it, and that didn't work out. And finally, a person's foundation bought the land and then kind of donated it to the CNLM, the Center for Natural Land Management. And there is a manager that is managing it mainly for the endangered pocket mouse we have here. But there's a lot of other biology work going on, especially for things like California gnatcatchers. So let me show you the crew working the area, these biologists, next. So this is, I think, in 2019, very lush preserve area. People were coming out to see the wildflowers that had come out. And you're looking at the three biologists for the center who were doing a gnatcatcher survey. So there's a lot of biological work that's actually going on, and the public may not be aware of it as they come through the preserve. Pretty sight. Keep going. Okay. Now that tree on the left has died, unfortunately. The one on the right always has nice stuff. In 2019, look at that. The top has. Aha! I have a good camera, don't I? What is that? You should know what type of bird that is. It's not an Anna's hummingbird. Anna's doesn't have all that rufous. What is it? It's called an Allen's hummingbird. An Allen's hummingbird. Let's see what its throat looks like. There's none of those feathers on its forehead. This is a male, 1/2 speed. This doesn't do justice to it. It's named for a California collector of wildlife whose name was Charles Andrew Allen. And you can tell these two species of hummingbird apart by how the male flies. Anna's on the right, goes way up in the air and then comes down And then at the bottom of the J, there's a popping sound from its tail feathers. Well, Allen's hummingbird has a pendulum sort of display. Very, very characteristic, very noticeable. Both of them are resident. We do have potentially other hummingbird species coming through in migration. Ah, look, another bird in that tree. Sounds just like a mocking, well, not like a mocking, well, it does. Sounds like a mockingbird. The cadence is a little bit off. So if you hear what you think is a northern mockingbird, look again. See what that, if the bird looks like this. It is a California thrasher. It's an indicator species. It needs coastal sage. Now, I swore in 2019 that I would get a picture of this bird that is a resident, even though he doesn't look like it from the checklist. It is very secretive. It's a secretive bird. So I'm going to try and get a picture of this bird. Do you have your virtual cameras ready? You know, I used to give extra credit to my students, my ornithology students, if they could provide a good picture of this. Okay, let's see. Look on the right, take a picture. Ah, well, you got its head. I guess that's important. If the eye is in focus, they say, then you have a good picture. Well, look, there it is again. Try and get a picture. No, though that's a field mark. That funny cocktail. Look. Shh. It's coming up the bush on the other side. It's getting to the top of the bush. Take a picture. Wow. That's a keeper. Only took me 2 weeks to get that. This bird, the voice of the chaparral, has a bouncing ball pattern, is a rented. It's an indicator species. Now we're approaching one of the observation areas. This is a very popular one. Sometimes you'll see someone there inventorying or doing a census of whales going up and down. We have whales pretty much all parts of the year. If you're lucky, the gray whales on migration will sometimes be close enough to be seen easily from this vantage point as well. It's usually a very crowded little observation area. What we're going to do is we're going to look to the left and we're going to see what's called San Juan Rock. Now, I'm not sure about this virtual field trip. With social distancing, getting everybody in there is going to be a problem. But hey, you're virtual, right? We can crowd together. That's not a problem. So let's go over to the observation area and see what we can see. Stuff. We have these San Juan rocks. It's always changing what's on them. Today, there are these large birds. They're cormorants. Now, this is a rock formation. This is 2013. That it was divided. You got about a third of the rock to your right and about 2/3 to the left. The ocean is relentless. And in the storms, the winter of 2016, 2017, that section was actually toppled. So we even have less now. Here's a cormorant. It doesn't have oil in its feathers, so it can dive better. And he's drying his feathers in that characteristic posture. We have 3 species of cormorant on the top, and there's the brown pelicans. Now I'm interested in what's going on around the buoy out there. It's about 2,800 feet away on that observation point. And you get pictures like this, and oh, look at that. That's what we want to see. In addition to that, I've also taken pictures off of Strand Beach is directly to the north of the Headlands, where I'm about 4,000 feet away from the buoy with my camera. There's actually a bird that's going to fly behind the buoy. That you can see that dot there. And I'll show you where I'm taking pictures from in that position. So here we go. People ask me what I'm doing. They say, "Are you looking at whales, just like Captain Dave's boat here?" And I say, "No, I'm not doing that. I'm looking for loons. That's what everybody's looking for. Isn't everybody looking for loons?" Oops, shouldn't have mentioned loons. You had to figure that out. So here we have migration of, what the heck, loons. They're not in a single stream. You can see this. We'll move across here. You can see this flock. They're flying very quickly. Something like 40 to 50 miles an hour. They're coming up from Mexico and Central America. They winter there. And they're going all the way to Alaska and the northern part of Canada, where they will breed in freshwater lakes. I'm going to give you 90 seconds of loon migration. 90 seconds. This is a single sequence. Some years I've seen 1,000 an hour go by. Other years, like 2020, this year, I went out a couple of times, that when I could, and saw 3 maximum. In those years, they are migrating farther out, and occasionally you'll see some way out there, loons migrating through. Then they kind of funnel in around Santa Barbara, Point Conception, where they're seeing consistently 1,000, 1,200 loons an hour going by. So you got to hit it just right, the right day. Oh, look, there was a tern going after its food. We got gulls and terns out here too. You know, one good tern deserves another. So even though they're looking like they're in a single file, as you saw from the previous picture, they're not. This is off strand, so I have a better lateral view of this. That's what I wanted. But I'm still 4,000 feet away. Of course, the buoy has sea lions. Those aren't seals. Sea lions are balancing balls on their nose. Seals are not going to end up in a show doing that. There will be seals you will sometimes see on San Juan rocks, but there will always be, seems to be, sea lions on the buoy. And I know when I'm getting to the end of this, because there's another species trying to travel north. I happen to just catch on the film. He has a long way to go to where the loons are going. There he comes. You see how fast the loons are going. Fascinating display. Okay. So what is this bird? Well, I gave you the answer already. Basically, it's a Pacific loon, April-May peak of migration. Okay, we're on the last leg of our journey. Going to come up and look at this area. Is a bird that's singing here. Is that a duck? Is that a gnatcatcher? Is that a hummingbird? What is that? It's another one of our sparrows. It's our song sparrow, which is a resident bird. Okay, now we come up to here, and you know, I think that there may be something coming up the trail. Do you have your virtual camera ready? Because it's going to be 2 seconds. You can have 2 seconds to get this. There. Wow. Look at that. May 5th, 2010. Absolute lucky, in the right place at the right time with a camera in my hand. Now, if we go up a little bit further, we see this large bush. It always has lots and lots of birds. Sometimes there's a California quail one. I've seen that here. I've seen a number of birds here. Let's see if we can find something else on that bush. Has this bird sitting up there? I think we've seen its relative. Show you that comparison. Spotted towhee. That came too fast. And there is our California towhee. These are related. This is a very skittish sort of bird. You can see the California towhee's on the top. The spotted towhee is sporadic. I think it's there all year round. It is, at sometimes, it's hard to find. In fact, some of the people who go to the Headlands regularly have not seen this bird. It's there. Careful, watch your step. You almost stepped on that arthropod that just crossed the road. You have to really pay attention when you're on these virtual field trips, you know, that the first rule of naturalists is to do no harm to the species we're looking at. So let's take a look at what just came across. Now, I must admit I've only seen this once, and that was in that June of 2011. And looking in the literature, the males roam around during this period of time looking for mates. But apparently, I guess, we probably have a small population of these burrowing scorpions on the Dana Point Preserve. So be careful where you walk at some times of the year. So we're almost out of the preserve. The animals I showed you are in the approximate location of where I remember they were in. So that scorpion was actually along this little area here. So let's keep walking. Okay, we're approaching the gate that's going out of the preserve. There's a lot of change since 2010 in this area. Here we are outside. There's a lot of water flow going into this area from the street, so the vegetation is really dense, or the densest area of vegetation that we have. But let's take a look at that today. So here we are. It is May 24th, 2020, and there's a whole display here at the entrance of this preserve. However, if we look closely, we will see that the trail is closed due to concerns regarding COVID-19. Hopefully, when things get normal, if there is such a thing, we'll have access to this site again. Now, there's a bonus here for us. I saw this in the field, and I got some pictures of it. There's actually 2 birds that are saying goodbye to us in this photograph. So let's look at this one here on the top. You should know what it is. Remember, birders try and identify every bird they see. Even if you've seen it 1,000 times, you identify it again. And this bird is a northern mockingbird. We've seen that before. Was even better. Look on the lower left, right above the fence. And there was a California quail this morning calling and saying, instead of Chicago, Chicago, he was saying, come back, come back, come back. This video on May 9th, 2019, I gave an invited talk on the common birds of the Headlands Preserve of Dana Point to the docents and friends of the Dana Point Headlands. That's an active organization. I suggest you inquire about how to join. I led a field trip before that talk. Most of these slides and videos that you saw made up the program, not all of them. The audio and additional slides were added today, May 24th. And these talks I am putting on YouTube. I'm going to put about a dozen of my talks on YouTube, no more. JDW Talks is my channel. Talks on genealogy, census, Ellis Island, and some natural history talks as well. So if you enjoyed this, spread the word, and I hope you aren't too fatigued after our virtual field trip and not too sweaty. And hopefully one day I'll see you on the Headlands, and we can both be on the preserves. Thank you.